Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to the 7th of 10 sessions that we are convening here on Humanity Rising, which we're calling the Masculine Dialogues. We're very proud that we're in partnership with the Luminary Leadership Institute and Age Nation and scores of live streaming partners as this broadcast is being aired globally on one of the most important issues of our time, and that is the nature of masculinity and being male. After thousands of years of patriarchy, we know about the toxic aspects of manhood in a coercive world where nature and women have been systematically subordinated, abused, and exploited. We're also aware that patriarchy is breaking up. And over the last several centuries, there's been the rise of women's liberation, most intensely since the ending of the Second World War. We are seeing more recently the rise of gender and sexual fluidity as the very definition of what it means to be a man and a woman is undergoing radical transformation. So we've dedicated a whole week to what we're calling the Masculine Dialogues. And we have covered basically 3 domains of man in relationship to himself and the soul, man in relationship to others, and starting tomorrow, man in relationship to the world. And we have now come to the 7th session, and this will be on the iconography of Black manhood, which is one of the most relevant topics in certainly the United States, given the murder of George Floyd and the constant arrests and shootings of Black men around the country. There's several trials going on right as we speak that touch on this issue. So this could not be a more relevant issue to take up within the larger context of the shape-shifting of masculinity and maleness in our time. Before we start this program, I invite you, as we always do when we start our Humanity Rising sessions, to just take a moment in all the busyness and tumult of your day. Center yourself in your body. Take a breath. And just for a minute or so, center yourself on your heartbeat. Attune yourself with your own heart in a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving that you're alive. We're all alive at this most extraordinary moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. And now with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude and love for each and every one of you who are joining our session today, I want to introduce Dr. Carroy Ferguson, who I've met through Humanity Rising and who I've gotten to know and consider a good friend, who has convened a number of sessions for us on the Black male experience. He comes with enormous credentials. He took his Ph.D. in psychology from Boston College, has been a practicing psychologist, also a tenured professor and dean at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. For many, many years, he was the president and also co-president of the Association of Humanistic Psychology, that you may remember was founded by Abe Maslow and Carl Rogers back in 1962, a couple of the great psychologists in that era. He serves on multiple boards, has written a number of books, many articles, and has a network, and I would say a deep, compassionate concern for what we're going to discuss today, and that is the iconography of Black manhood. So Cuff, thank you so much for convening this panel, and I turn the session over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Looks like my background disappeared. But anyway, I appreciate very much and very honored to be here. And I want to start this session by introducing a panelist. And so as I do this, could you all turn your cameras on so that we can move forward? I want to introduce first Dr. Joyce Hope Scott. Joyce is a clinical professor of Africana Studies at Boston University. She's also a former scholar at the Oxford Roundtable and a former Fulbright professor, which she did in West Africa. She is also the co-founder and co-director of international networks of scholars and activists for African reparations. And she's a president of the Pan-African Forum in Boston. She's been a consultant and I think still is an expert consultant for the United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner for Implementation of Human Rights. And she's an organizer doing a lot of work in repair work, author, journal, credentials go on and on and on. So I want to welcome Joyce to the panel, and hopefully we'll have some good talk together.
Thank you.
The other person I want to introduce is Dr. Jimidar Kamara. Dr. Kamara is actually a colleague of mine at UMass Boston. He got his PhD from University of Michigan. He's a former dean at UMass Boston and former multi-chair of university's Africana Studies departments, both in different places. He's an associate professor of Africana Studies at the campus. And he's the founding director of the Center for African, Caribbean, and Community Development at the UMass Boston campus. And in the academy, he previously taught actually at Brandeis University. He served as director of the William Monroe Trotter House at the University of Michigan. and chaired the African and African American Studies departments at the University of Michigan in Flint. He's also a Fulbright scholar, and did that work in Benin, and beyond the academy, he served on numerous boards, and actually at UMass Boston, he helped to found and continues to coordinate what we call the annual Martin Luther King Jr. Amilcar Cabral Commemorative Program. Accolades go on and on and on again. So I'm very happy to have you here, Jamadari. Thanks.
Thank you.
Other person I want to introduce is Ron Marlowe. Ron is a good friend, and I can always count on him to come through. He comes and teaches a lot in some of my classes, does little talks. He's currently Director of Workforce Development and Alternative Development for the Action for Boston Community Development, Inc. in Boston. He has a wealth of experience. Prior to holding that particular role, he was Vice President of Workforce Development at the National Urban League in New York. And he's held numerous senior leadership roles. For example, in the Massachusetts Executive Office of Labor and Workforce with Mass Housing, the Massachusetts Executive Office of Administration and Finance, served as Assistant Secretary for Access and Opportunity. Had an opportunity to work very closely with Ron around developing a diversity fellows program at the State House when he was working with the governor. He's been an undergraduate, undersecretary for workforce development with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And he has a master's in science and law and policy and society from Northeastern University. And his work actually spans both the public and nonprofit sector. So in addition to all of these roles, he served on a number of different boards. And again, the accolades can go on and on. So welcome, Ron. Okay. I think what I wanted to do was to initially start our conversation. And there was a part of me that was conflicted. Part of me was saying, I wish we were sitting around at the Thanksgiving table and having some food together and having a chat together. It was one of the most wonderful things that happens when family gets together is that we get to do a lot of really deep sharing and kind of spiritual connections through that particular context. And so there was a part of me that was pulling that direction. And then there was a part of me saying, well, we're in this national, international platform, so we do have to do the intellectual thing too. So those things are part of the experience I'm having, but it's also tantamount to the kind of experiences that we have when we are acting out our roles of the Black male role, the Black woman role, where there are multiple aspects of what we grapple with on a daily basis. And so it's in that context too that hopefully we can do some sharing. Now, when we get together, sometimes we like to do this. We get a little music going because there's some rhythm stuff that goes on at the soul level. So when I thought about this, I got reminded of an old song that's been out there for some time. And it's a song that was sung by Sam and Dave. People remember those? Sam and Dave? Okay. And they had a wonderful little song called I'm a Soul Man. Okay. And so what I thought we would do initially is share that particular experience with people of what that song sounds like. And by the way, it got usurped by a couple of white guys, John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd, in terms of singing it on Saturday Night Live and becoming like the Blues Brothers. But Sam and Dave were the originators of it. Now the lyrics go, coming to you on a dusty road, good loving, I got a truckload. And when you get it, you got something. So don't worry, because I'm coming. I'm a soul man. Got what I got the hard way, and I'll make it better each and every day. So honey, don't fret, because you ain't seen nothing yet. I'm a soul man. Listen, I was brought up on a side street. I learned how to love before I could eat. I was educated from good stock. When I started loving, I just can't stop. I'm a soul man. Well, grab the rope and I'll pull you in, give you hope, and be your only boyfriend. I'm a soul man. Okay, so I'm going to ask. Those are the lyrics, but we like to have rhythm going with our experience. So I'm going to ask Rich if you could play that for us.
Truckload.
Okay. So I'm a soul man. So we're here going to talk to people around about the whole issue of being a soul man. But we're going to try to see if we can do this from the perspective of looking at the iconography of Black manhood. And want to talk a little bit as a way to try to set a context for this. Want to see if we can do a little share to see if we can frame the discussion a bit. So let me see if I can bring this up as a share and talk about this from the perspective of the kind of three life spaces that we simultaneously live in. And this is whether or not actually we have a Black experience or any other kind of experience. I want to contend that as human beings, and particularly as Black folks, we live simultaneously in three life spaces. One is, and here we are, you and your consciousness, or we in our consciousness, but we live simultaneously in three life spaces. One I call your personal life space. Second is the societal life space, and then the global life space. By personal life space, what we mean is that you and your consciousness, conscious mind are at the center of these three life spaces. And in your personal life space, these are things that that we have direct face-to-face encounters with, that we form thoughts, beliefs, attitudes in relationship to them. But we're there face-to-face, and we encounter them directly. Societal life space is actually secondhand kind of information. It's stuff that we encounter through different kinds of medium. We're not there face to face, but we may have conversations with people, events, objects, places about certain things, but it's indirect. But it still exists in the mind, and it's very real. And we have thoughts and feelings in relationship to societal life space. So when we ask the question, like, where does society exist? A lot of people like to put society out there. Society is really in here. And it's in that societal life space that we act out whatever it is that we've incorporated in one form or another. And similarly with the global life space, it is all the things that we've been exposed to in a global stage, but it's indirect. If we've never had the direct experience face to face, it is an indirect experience. Yet we have very strong thoughts and feelings in relationship to the global experiences. If you've never been to Germany, Germany exists in the mind as it's a part of your global life space. And everything you read about, hear about, been exposed to, that's in your global life space, in your conscious mind. Yet it's very real. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just how we relate to it and so forth. So it's in that context that I want to invite us to have a conversation and invite the audience to listen to our conversation and how we might want to talk about what we're calling the iconography of Black manhood. What is it that we have incorporated in our unique life spaces, and how that might relate to other life spaces that other people may have. So what is iconography? Iconography basically are the images that we acquire and use, and our interpretations of these. It's also the visual depictions used to convey certain cultural or historical or symbolic meaning. And it's the messages that we get from the images, the objects, the events, the circumstances that we're exposed to in our individual and collective life spaces. So where do we get these things from? Where do we get these images and from? So some of the sources are very familiar. We get it from history. We get it from family and friends. We get it from ancestors. You know, we, in the Black experience, we place a lot of emphasis too on our ancestors. And some of us can directly experience our ancestors, and some of us, we get ancestral information through readings and so forth, through our traditions. Ethnic and race-linked childhood direct experiences. We get images and messages coming through about Black manhood from there. Societal role models may be another source for some iconographic images and messages. Global Pan-African role models. The specific neighborhoods or communities that we may have been exposed to. We get images emerging from that experience about Black manhood. Churches. And then the various image-making media that we're exposed to. These are all very common: TV and movies and radio and societal media platforms, books, and so forth. These are common sources for the kind of images and messages about Black manhood that we may be exposed to. Now, again, later on, hopefully we'll have some perspective around the kind of journeys that this experience takes us through as we relate to the Black experience. So hopefully we can get around to that too. So let me stop share here and see if we can at least get some of your preliminary thoughts. My background showed back up and I'm in the forest again. You might notice I have a very playful attitude around all this stuff. So we can get very serious, but also I want to be playful with some of these notions, because you can go very deeply into this, and it depends on your attitude as to how you get into this material. So I'm gonna ask, and forgive me, I'm gonna call us by our first name, because that's what families do. So I'm gonna ask Joyce to share some preliminary thoughts with us, and then we can, and I'm gonna ask each of you to do that, and we can get into some conversations around what we've been exposed to, knowing that our own experiences are actually quite unique to us. There's not a monolithic experience that's at play, but it's important to share what we've been exposed to and how we've incorporated it into our own life experiences. So Joyce, you want to kick us off?
Well, with my ancestors' permission, and I think I've got their permission to speak, I have to start this conversation with my experience of Black manhood. And I would call, before I can branch out to talk about scholarship and other kinds of the other layers, societal and global even, which certainly I've been fortunate to do. And I'll just say I had my first experiences with what I call the first man. That's what I call him. And that was my father. And the very first experience that I had of being alive in this world was being thrown up in his arms. He was lying crosswise across the bed and throwing me up like men do children. And I was laughing. I think I wasn't even a year old, but it's the first thing that I remember at all, of being separate as a separate being from I guess, my mother and their surroundings. And he was laughing and his beautiful white teeth. And I wanted him to keep doing it. And so that I could keep looking at the teeth and how I felt as he it threw me up with such joy and such love and so on. That was the seminal experience. And it's been a long time ago, so I won't talk about how old I am, but it was a long time ago. And it's the first experience that I have in my entire life, the oldest thing that I remember, but it was with a Black man that I'll call the first man. That kind of love and sharing has grounded me in the reality. It was beginning of the grounding to understand the love that can be shared, that Black men can have for their children, for their wives or mothers or whatever, and others. This was a little community. I guess I know now, as being a scholar, there's a scholarly name for it. I guess it's a Black settlement. I suppose that's what they call it. These people, these men had just walked away, as I understand it. He and his father, his great grandfather, and his 3 or 4 brothers had just walked away from, I guess it's Dafuski, if I want to locate the island in South Seas, the Sea Islands, and just walked to this place where the state was having homesteading opportunities, and they just became people who acquired a lot of land. And I call them the landed gentry. That's what they thought they were, because land was so important to them. And they spread out and had this very kind of relationship with nature that they tried to teach me. And I'm sorry to say I didn't learn it all, but then that was the paternal side. But then on the maternal side, I had the father. Everybody, he was Papa to everybody, and nobody called him anything but Papa. And he was a tracker. I won't say a hunter, but because he was a tracker. He, in the tradition of the Black Seminoles, which he was one of, and he could listen to the ground and tried to teach me how to listen to the ground and listen to the animals coming, to tell what animal was coming. So these are the 2 sort of pillars of Black manhood that began to shape me in the middle, or to put me in the middle as somebody special who could do anything. And of course, it was, strangely enough, never told, well, you can't do that because you're a girl. And so this becomes a sort of, I guess, personal, in your first circle there, the communal, personal, I've got it here. I had to take a look at it better. The personal life cycle. Yes. And then interestingly enough, these people, I guess the community of men spread out, and they, following my grandfather on my mother's brothers, they were all hunters. It was in that part of the world where I grew up, it was something very special about being a hunter, about going hunting at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning. Actually, Toni Morrison writes about this in Song of Solomon and so on, when Milkman goes south to Virginia, and he has that experience of hunting. It's an initiation process, I understood, but I always wanted to go, hunting with the men. And of course, they cajoled me to say, yeah, well, okay, you can go, but we'll come get you. It's going to be early now. You have to be awake. But of course, they never came to get me naturally, but I was always never awake also. But so I'll call that wanting to go hunting with the men, not to really, I didn't want to kill anything, but I just wanted to know that camaraderie, to follow that, what I saw as protective, loving spirit into the nature that they grounded themselves in, to see where that would lead me. And from there, I have to trace my journey outward to society, because one of those men, those hunters, was one who lived in New York, and he was like the second father, and he always wanted to, it was this thing between him and my actual father well, she should come and live with me because I can expose her to the best things. And of course, my father would have none of that, never and ever. She's going to be here. But I was always anxious to go and see what was there. And he made me, this uncle, want to go because he would take me to Kennedy Airport. I guess it was Idlewild or whatever at the time, just to watch the planes and say to me, oh, you can take that plane. That's El Al. It's going to Jerusalem, or it's going to Tel Aviv or whatever. Or that one's going to Paris. This is Air France, or this is TAP going to Portugal, going to Lisbon. And one day you can go there. And I didn't think anything of it then, but now when I think of it, who does that? What uncle takes a little girl out to watch the planes and puts in her mind, you can do that. You can go there. And that is the journey outward to the global, personally, to the global world. And because it was always in my mind, wow, yes, I'm going to come and live with him and go to university there. But then after that, I'm going to go on those flights and see exactly where they lead me. And I can honestly say that that grounding of, I don't know, wanting to go hunting, I imagine, it probably has a very pejorative iconography attached to it, like a woman, I suppose. But essentially, I guess I can say that. And it's the desire to know more, to just see what's there. But at the same time, you couldn't just do that. I had to understand from my teaching from them. And none of this is to dispel the power of the women. That's another whole story and another whole session. But it had to do with the idea that you've got to give something back. You are a special person. You've had these opportunities, and your life, in your life, you have a debt, you have a rent to pay. You know, in other words, you have something to give back to society. And whatever you do in your life, make sure that it's useful to somebody other than you, that you have a debt to pay to society. None of this is to say that I was and they were absolutely unaware of the racist paradigm in which we were all contained or tried to be contained. Though somehow it felt not so omnipresent as I've learned about it later as a scholar and traveling in different places and living in different places. So this personal space of these people who were settlers, they settled their own community on both sides and founded their own school. When the county, the whites wouldn't give them a school, they just took somebody's land, one uncle, and had interestingly enough, a white architect who came and built the school. And he said he built the ground of the floor in such an interesting way, running some of the boards running vertical and some running horizontal. We always thought that was crazy. He just didn't want to build a good school for us. But now I realize that is an incredibly unique thing that he did. And it's a monument. I mean, it's a historical site now in the community because of the way that because of that uniqueness that he gave. He decided to give something special in the building of that school. So these were people, not to try to, in that iconographic image that I have in my mind of them, to say that, you know, there weren't those people that you call those strange people that do strange things and things that didn't happen that were not nice things. I don't want to say that, but what I want to say is that is the catapult out of the personal space, driven by my vision, my remembrance, iconographically speaking, as well as narratologically of those men, of the histories that they told me, and the grounding myself as a woman, as a girl, a special person who could do anything she wanted to do with their support. This going out into societal space, of course, I realized and that there's a larger frame that I need to look at here. I guess you should stop me. I don't know how much time I've got.
Go ahead. I'm intrigued with what you're saying.
So, and of course, I'm leaving so much out. I'm leaving all that soul man stuff out. I'm gonna, just because that needs to be in another kind of conversation. But they were an interesting group of people who really didn't take any crap, I guess I should say, because that's what they said to me. Military men, ultimately they went into the military, many of them, and with the stories of fighting not only for the country, but fighting for their rights and their respect as Black men. All of those are parts of my stories that both the narratological and of course the images. I didn't think that they wanted me to show the images of them. I didn't get that sense from them, so I'm not showing them. But to me, they were beautiful men. That's all I can say. In any event, the idea of being an intellectual becomes important to me at that point, because I think that I'm a truth. In my, I guess, childish way of praying a prayer at the time, I wanted to know the truth. I just said, if I can just know what the truth is, that's all I want. I'm not asking for money or anything like that. I just want to know the truth. And I didn't even know what I meant by the truth. But I just wanted to know. I wanted to know what was behind these things that people were telling me. I was never satisfied with that. And that, so the societal space becomes one of searching. Maybe it's the same trope of hunting. I'm not sure. Hunting something, hunting truth. Going to university, and then from there, going into the world as a student, going into Europe to study as a student and so on, again, driven, I would think, by my uncle, the uncle who says, well, you can take that plane one day and you can go there. And of course, when the time came for me to actually do that, go and study, they all contributed. It was the oddest thing, because some of them were known as tightwads. Some of those, but every single one of them said, okay, she's going here, she's going to do some studying, and we have to, we're going to support her. And they did. It was very odd, because some of the ones who gave were loving in a way that I had not seen them more than they had been before. So that was the encourage. What you're doing is okay. Yes, do it. That was the message I got. That, again, being introduced to the idea of where is it that I am here? So what is this country, and how do we get these various iconographic representations? I began to get that in mind in terms of the societal teaching and learning experience at university, at research experiences, teaching, working, and so on and so forth. And it's clear to me, I think, in my ability, my I guess quest to look at this role, or this imagistic need to represent Black manhood in a certain way, to co-opt it even, and to frame it, to manipulate it. And Douglas talks about this even in seizing the identity of the captive African from the very beginning, and controlling it, and in other words, the truth and the knowledge about self and identity that Douglas talks about so powerfully, keeping that, restraining that, refraining that from Black men, and showing images, iconographic images of them. And I particularly think about, and maybe we'll show it later, but I don't want to bother to do that now. It starts with these advertisements for sales of captive Africans. They're just little representations, a little figure with some kind of little hat and a grass skirt on. And when you look at those, I will maybe show them later, so I can show what I'm talking about. It's the same image. It's the same. I noticed it's the same image of the same little character, whether it's on a bill of sale, a notice for sales of Black men, of people coming in on the ships, or whether it was an advertisement for Runaway. It's the same image. This is that iconographic image. It's a nondescript. It's just a thing with a hat, a head, and a little grass skirt, and a spear in his hand, or whatever, and that represents Black manhood. And from that image, which becomes the sort of the seminal image of Black manhood in its captivity, there's a struggle, it seems to me, as I try to make sense of it, of men, Black men, as they move from that carcerality into a liberatory posture or space where self can be redefined in other images. And there's a concerted effort by men like Martin Delany and Reverend Allen and others to show a certain image of themselves. All the time, Martin Delany is, although there are other images of him, the one of him in his military uniform, his Civil War uniform, is the one he wears, the Union one, is the one that is the most central. Frederick Douglass, of course, and if you look at these men, they're posed in a certain way. Their dress is all the same. I look at them and my oldest great-great-grandfather's photo, he's posed the same way that Douglass is posed. This is to say we are men and this is the way we look. It's the same with families. The white family poses with the father sitting with the women standing. It's the same pose that they have in not only my family, but in families that emerge in this in the plethora of new images that come about once that period of enslavement is over, and there's a space for liberatory expression, I would say. And so I think then that what I saw certainly in the societal space is this struggle, this intertextual, this contestatorial space or contestatorial struggle, if you will, to seize control of the Black male image, whether it's James Van Der Zee and what he chooses to record in his film, or the various kinds of images that, let's say, Du Bois puts in the Crisis, carefully selected images of this represents the Black man, in contradistinction to the kinds of images that were being shown of Black men in the broader society. Lynchings, in other words, the lynched body becomes the first postcard that goes out to the world. Well, this is the iconography of the Black man that's constantly in conflict with the image that they want to present for themselves. So it's so curious that becomes the first postcard that's sent around the world to people, to folks looking at the broken and, again, mocked and contained, if you will, body of the Black man, to keep that kind of image afoot. Alongside that comes the minstrelsy, the image of the minstrel, i.e., if he's not brutalized on the lynching tree, then he is mocked as a buffoon by T.D. Rice and other minstrel characters or performers and so on, or the Al Josephs later on who perform, Bing Crosby and the others who perform in blackface and movies and so on. This becomes the iconography that the public sells in this societal space. So it's a struggle between the images that I can get from those produced by the Black newspapers, by the collectors of museums or the Schomburg and other places that collect those images of the Black man in contradistinction, Black manhood rather, Black men and their families, Black men as race men, the military men of World War I, of World War II. These are all iconographic, for me, steps that build a societal image in constant contrast with and constant struggle to maintain its own integrity against the images that assail Black manhood out in the regular society. And so that's what I go when I go to stay abroad a longer period of time in Africa, the scene of it all, I guess, really the site of the first man, if I want to call it that. Then the global space, then I begin to see something that is incredibly unique. And what is clear to me about that space is that despite the fact that you've got a colonial structure or a history in many instances of the settler colonies who reconstruct the societies the way they want, that there is a cultural tradition, and these are represented iconographically in ways of Black manhood that I could not have imagined without having actually gone abroad to see them myself. That we have Black kings that still exist today, walking around breathing in 2021, not in the history books of Mansa Musa and these great men that we read about, that they're actually there. It became a drive for me to bring my students there so they could see that, among other things. And so part of designing the international service learning and international internships that I did for 12 or 13 years, taking students abroad to spend time in African countries, giving service, but also receiving, learning themselves. I wanted them to see that you got a real Panther King. Yes, this is the Panther King here. And I am going to show that image in a little bit. And that's where a Wakanda, there is a Wakanda, quote unquote, and that is the former kingdom of Dahomey. And yes, there are kings who still exist today. And there are Amazons. Some of them were my students in my class when I taught at the university. And they said, yes, madam, you came here to study the Amazon. I can tell you, I'm a descendant. Okay. So it was very real to me in that sense. So I think I'm probably way over my time, but just to try to show this, for me anyway, how I moved out into these various spaces, and the reason for the choice of commitment, of professional commitment, writing, research, service, and all of those other kinds of things. For me, it seems to be a path that drove me out on the hunt, wanting to go on that hunt that I never was able to go on to see what indeed I could find if I could stay awake until 6 a.m. So I'm going to stop there, and maybe we'll have a chance, and if so, I can show some of the images later. But thank you so much, and I apologize if I've gone over my time.
Thank you so much, Joyce. Actually, it was a wonderful journey, sort of demonstrating the essence of it's sort of the distinction between what you actually experience in the personal life space with all of these beautiful Black men showing love and showing which when you stepped outside of the personal life space and then entered into the societal and even the global, somehow it didn't match. It did not match with what you were experiencing personally with the wonderful men that were showing you love and security and a whole lot of other kinds of positive things you were vibing on. And so that's a common experience, and so thank you so much for sharing that aspect of it. That journey was a wonderful journey to go through with you. I'm going to turn now to Ron and ask you, Ron, to kind of share a little bit about your journey in these three life spaces, and do it in whatever way that feels comfortable to you. Uh-oh.
Hey, Ron, we have that feedback. Do you have open sources, more than one source open?
No, not one. But let me do this, because that might take care of it.
This is better.
Oh, you got it, Ron. Nice job. Thanks.
Great.
So, Cuff, let me do it this way. Because I think one of the things you said in commenting on Joyce's experiences is universally true, that once we step outside of our personal spaces and enter into societal, and to the extent we get to enter into global, however defined, that it is not probably unique that there is this kind of dichotomy, if you will, between the but let me say this, in that for like Joyce, I mean, obviously, for those of us who are fortunate to have a father, not only obviously we all have a biological father, but a father who is present, that becomes the first way we identify and define what it means to be a Black man. And so my father, who was present, who was older than my mother, significantly 20 years older than my mother, from the South, like my mother, but served in World War II, and comes from a generation of not only Black people, but Black experiences that shaped their lives. From my father, I took, most importantly, the commitment to family. And when I say family, I'm not even saying the more global family of aunts and uncles and cousins. I'm saying, that more nuclear unit of mother, father, sister, in the case of my family. And that, my father demonstrated and showed, however unintentionally, that, the first responsibility of man is to take care of his family in whatever ways that is possible. For some, that means working more than one job. For some, that means working one job and working it as if it was two. For some, it means, that generosity of fatherhood, or of, that is not distinct from being a man, are the things my father taught me. And as I've aged and grown, I can see the nexus between how I engage my family to how my father engaged our family. Going, just a one ring out from my father is one of my uncles, my Uncle Bob, who taught me and showed me what to be civically minded means. Very involved in political campaigns in Boston, going back to the John D. O'Brien run for mayor. That's going way back for those who lived or grew up or existed in Boston, in Boston's political history. And I'm a child of the civil rights movement. And so my uncle believed in government and believed in Black engagement in government. And, much of my life has centered around, if not government, the nexus of the nonprofit world that, both fills spaces that the government does not fill, but is also supported by the government. My next two are my first two football coaches playing Pop Warner football, Coach Anderson and Coach Thompson. Men who not only taught me about what I would call community, because a football team is just a community of individuals, who are working towards a common purpose. So they taught me about community. They taught me about leadership, discipline, instruction, team. And if one was to pull apart my life, one would probably see the incredibly strong influences that these four Black men have had for me, that actually equipped me to go beyond, if you will, the insular worlds of a boy growing up in Boston. I can't leave out, from a societal standpoint, that, television was such a major part of my growing up, in that, the shows, whether it was Good Times or Sanford and Son, or the older shows such as The Brady Bunch or Leave It to Beaver, each of these shows, and even Fred Sanford in his own way, showed men who were committed to family, committed in different ways to the values that need to be imparted from elder to younger. And these shows are shows I still watch to this day when I get an opportunity. My wife was teasing me the other night because I was watching The Rifleman. in her mind, what she caught was like how sappy this is. But, you know, even there in that insular family of a father and a boy, you know, you see the values being taught, and it not mattered not that they were white in most instances, because the values are universal. The values speak to a humanity we hope exists not only within ourselves, but among those we engage. You know, and globally, you know, yes, I've had the benefit of travel, but I think from a global perspective, you know, I've taken so much from history, whether it's the readings of Frederick Douglass, Du Bois, Washington, the times they lived in, the struggles they encountered, their paths to engaging those struggles. You know, we love to have the juxtaposition of Du Bois and Washington, you know, as if they were somehow polar opposites, when perhaps at the end of the day, they were just the flip side of the same coin, trying in their own ways to make sense of the world in which they lived within, trying to push against that world with the tools that each of them had, that, you know, may not resonate with some and resonates incredibly well with others. And so, you know, as I listened to Joyce walk through, you know, her experiences in each of those spaces, you know, images and memories flood back. Even when you played Soul Man, memories flood back as to, you know, how we come into the world, how we're shaped initially in that personal space. And let's be honest, not all of us have the benefit of the shaping of a loving mother and a loving father who are in close proximity. And, you know, and because I have, you know, that gives me one outlook that may differ completely from someone who is my same age, grew up in the same neighborhoods in which I grew up in, you know, but have a very different outlook on this thing we call the world. You know, but the memories come flooding back as to, you know, who am I? What does it mean to be a Black man to me? What does my representation of a Black man represent to my son, to my daughter, to my peer group, to a younger generation of individuals who haven't been shaped by the civil rights movement in the same ways, who have been more beneficiary of that movement than even I was, and so therefore sometimes has less of a connection to it than I do. Doesn't make it a bad connection, doesn't even mean their outlook is bad, it means it's different. And so I will stop, so I leave ample time to our colleague to come in by this. I was thinking of this as we were starting this, you know, and I'm kind of wonky. I haven't had the pleasure or the discipline to join the ranks of the three of you as doctor, you know, but I constantly think of things and how I connect to them. And so, you know, all of us are familiar with the Latin term cogito ergo sum, or I think, therefore I am. But I like to play with these things. Not only do I think, therefore I am, therefore I engage. I engage, therefore I evolve. And that becomes the circle that defines how I and others connect to the world, sometimes in very meaningful, positive, productive ways, sometimes in less so. You know, but again, if I think and become and then engage and then evolve, you know, if we were to have this conversation 5 years from now, who knows what I would bring to the table, because I am constantly, hopefully, evolving. And so I will stop there and say, you know, like Joyce, it is easy to get caught up in thinking about these connections and sharing them. And then, you know, but you don't have a 4-hour session, you have a 90-minute session. So I will stop there and turn it over to my colleague.
All right. Thanks. So thank you so much, Ron. What you reminded me of also is, and if we have time and we may not, is the whole idea that when you were thinking about Black manhood and for that matter, even the Black experience, that it also exists in what I call like a psychohistorical context. So that it's not like our psyches or independent from the historical context in which we find ourselves. And that psychohistorical context helps to frame our consciousness and how we go through it. And a part of what the message I get, from your sharing has to do with, what does it mean to grow up in being exposed to civil rights, as opposed to someone who didn't grow up in that context, who also happened to be a Black male, and how that then shapes the consciousness of what it means to be Black and what it means to be male. So thank you so much for sharing that aspect of it. We have a sister that joined us who was originally supposed to be part of the panel, and forgive me, Jemadari, because I want to get the sister in here, and then I want you to bring up the rear a little bit, because you're so insightful about things. But Yvette has a hard time frame, so I want to bring in Yvette right now. Yvette, because of time, just introduce yourself and then share whatever you want to share, with us.
Afternoon, everyone. Greetings from the land of the path between the seas. I am in Panama. So apologies for joining late because of the internet connection, and I'm still in the hotel. I'm here for a UN meeting and my checkout is at 12:30. So apologies for not being able to stay longer. I love this conversation. And for me, I am the product of a man. I am the product of loving Black men. In my personal space, I am the product of men who loved me, showed it, told me, guided me, shaped me. My mom passed away when I was 12 years old. And my father raised me and my sister and my brother on his own with support, but he became my primary parent. So I've always had I feel safe in the light and the hands of Black men because of how I was raised. I was also an athlete. I ran for Panama, and I had a wonderful relationship with my coach. And then in college and coming to Boston, I've been blessed to have relationships with two of the men on this panel, Cuff and Jemadari and Babatuni. The women have been there, but I have this year with my father's transition, I realized how unique my experience was, and that we don't talk enough about how Black men are present. My father was fully present to the point that when he passed this year, I had friends reaching out, thanking us for sharing him with them. And these were friends that had two parents. They had their mother and their father. But Daddy was so present for us, which then allowed him to be present for my friends. So one of my friends said that he knew that his father never came to any of his games, but if Daddy was there, at some point Daddy was going to cheer him on, and he felt that someone was there for him. But the society doesn't. So that's been my personal experience, but society clashes with that experience, especially as it relates to Black men. Society doesn't want to hear that you love Black men unconditionally. Society doesn't want to hear that you have healthy relationships with Black men, that your elders, your mentors are Black men. So I think there's still a conflict in that conversation. And then I think in the movement, as an activist, some of that disconnect that society has placed upon us gets played out So whiteness seeps in to our relationship with Black men based on how society sees them. And then it becomes a struggle with them seeing themselves and then how they see Black women. But one of the things that I loved about the men that shaped me is that they didn't show perfection. They showed humanity. My father never pretended to be perfect. He became a widow at 44. So he was learning as he was doing, and he was very open about that, and he was very open about sharing that. And I grew up with these righteous men. Yesterday I was where I'm staying for my UN meeting in Panama, used to be the largest American base, military base in Panama. So in the Canal Zone, the territory that surrounded the canal was called the Canal Zone. And the US had bases that surrounded those areas to protect the canal that they oversaw. The base that I'm staying in is now called Ciudad de Saber, used to be Fort Clayton. And it used to be the largest base that even me as a Black Panamanian could not come in. And as a Black Zonian, because I was born and raised in this American territory. And yesterday during my exercise, I actually broke down in tears because I realized that this was the first time walking freely in this space as a Panamanian and as a Black woman. But what I wanted to honor was my grandfather as a construction of the Panama Canal. I was very proud, Martinican man, and what that meant to him. So those are the images, the messages. I grew up with a grandfather who worked in the construction of the canal and would give stories about how the white supervisors would want to, cut lunch. And he would say, tell them Big Mo said you have to keep eating. I grew up with my father, challenging the norm, when we were integrated into the white schools, and how education was perceived and how advocacy was perceived. I already knew advocacy. I already knew, I always, one of my first books in the Afro-Latino reader, History and Culture in the US, I actually think that my father was the first feminist in my life, because he was continuing, he made a promise. So he didn't hide the conflicts. He didn't, silence the conflict, and he challenged how I would also put myself in these positions. That's why, I can give Baba Cuff and Baba Jimidar headaches because, I was raised that I can challenge men in a respectful and loving way. And it's not going to change how they see me or my relationship with them. My father used to call me his why child, because he would think he would set out something so great. And I'd be like, why? I'm like, why? And of course, I'm sure Junai and Mama Joyce and Cup can say, yeah, we've seen that.
Beautiful, by the way. It's beautiful.
Yes. So I think my purpose, aside from saying Black and I'm proud in Spanish and English, and with my father's transition and seeing how Black men are perceived in society as not loving. And I love the way I love because of the way he loved me. I move in a world being clear of my own beauty because I grew up with a man telling me I am beautiful and Black every day. I didn't need to hear it outside. I grew up with a man who supported my advocacy because it was also an extension of him finally telling his story. So to me, that personal carries over into all my spaces. I can't separate it. My purpose is not a societal, personal, it's a life continuum. Because all of that says For me, Black men are human, Black women are human. We are loving, we are caring people, we are educated people, and I'm not willing to give that up. So I think we need more spaces like this to return, to re-engage, to love each other in our imperfections and our weaknesses and our strength. But at the end of the day, the ultimate thing is to love unconditionally. And that's what this beautiful Black man shaped me to think. And I am blessed, and I can say publicly to all the audience that I've been blessed that in landing in Boston, that loving energy of my father has been extended to the men and the mentors that I have been placed before, such as Cuff and Jemadari. Because I don't move. I have been able to get back up in Boston because of you. And I say thank you for you. Thank you for that. Love you for that. Love the complexity of that Blackness for that. And we need to elevate and lift that up a lot more. So I'm sorry I can't speak, but I just think this conversation is so important. I get to elevate and highlight Mama Joyce a lot more often than I get to elevate and celebrate the men. So I didn't want to lose that opportunity to celebrate and elevate the Black men that have shaped me.
Thank you so much, Yvette. There's a lot of takeaways from what you share, but and I just want to echo one little thing that's standing out to me. The exposure to a loving man, which is a disconnect from how society presents the imagery and the messages, and how you've carried forward that inner image that got created for you to activate what we know now as the law of attraction, pull into your experience other folks who can mirror that for you. And I'm just happy that I've been able to play part of that role.
Absolutely.
And Jemadari plays part of that role, and other people too. But that also just emanates from you. That is, that's what the energy is that you have that pulls us into that space. And it's vibrational, and we experience that. And so then when we've been on various programs together, it also emanates out and pulls people into that particular space. So thank you for sharing that aspect of it.
Thank you.
That's a part of the whole journey of what it means to be not only Black male, but what is the energy that gets fueled when there's a different kind of imagery that gets internalized. And what if society would internalize those same kinds of images? What if there was a global image that then pulled in through the law of attraction other kinds of experiences where there can be that kind of unconditional love? That's what I'm taking away from your sharing. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And safe journey and safe.
Thank you. See everyone soon.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Okay. All right. So Jemadari, thank you for your patience.
Oh, my brother. No, this has really been a wonderful conversation. All of us are so challenged by what we're involved with in the particular everyday, that carving out time and space to have conversations like this sometimes can be a challenge. And I know when you asked me to join this, I began to think about what I might say and thinking about the issues. But I'm very, very glad that things have evolved the way they have, and that I have had the opportunity to listen before speaking. And I'd like to just take a couple of minutes and really begin if you would, in the outside of what you have framed. Because there's some implicit assumptions that we have made in our conversation, beginning with our Blackness. And I'm glad that Yvette was able to join us, because for me, that her input has helped to highlight one of the central tensions implicit in our conversation, but we had not stated, the dialectical contradiction. I want to use, that's kind of one of them big words, but I'm gonna break it down. Because implicit is that in talking about this Black manhood, it evolves out of a paradigm. This evolves out of a framework within which we live, operate, survive. And our Blackness is shaped by, conditioned by, an oppositional relationship to whiteness. And each of you have talked, Ron and Joyce, talked about the immediacy of the impact of our family, of our immediate contact with manhood in our lives, whatever character that might have taken or might not have taken in shaping who we are as individuals, and therefore our relationship to society and that global universe. In my own life, that was conditioned by being in a family with a very strong father who unfortunately transitioned relatively early in my life, before I was 21, but who himself had made certain commitments to give back to community. And that meant a certain sacrifice that he had to make to family, and that he made because of what he did. Unlike Joyce, for whom I have a great deal both of love and respect, having been to Ocala and being shaped by that experience, I'm from the North. I grew up in Detroit. I'm so glad, Cuff, you started with Soul Man, because music, the environment, Motown shaped my life. That's the era I grew up in. It's a working class, industrial community. You learn to respect working people in Detroit. Everyone is tied in some way to, as we said in Detroit, Uncle Henry's plantation, some way or another. Everybody's tied to that. My father was, when I was born, the executive secretary of the NAACP in Detroit. And I grew up in a household where very early on, I understood the challenge of what it meant to be in a white-dominated society. He had had other involvement before, the NYA, National Youth Administration, and other organizations in the region. And I would hear the stories of what it meant to defend the Black community. That there were people who were, and this is just by being a child and, you know, shut your mouth and open your ears, of people who were coming from Mississippi that he had to meet. And it was very interesting, Joyce, when you mentioned your I think it was your uncle who took you to Idlewild and talked to you about the plains. In my life, Idlewild is a place. It's a place in Western Massachusetts, which was a retreat for Blacks from both Chicago and Detroit, who would come to this rural community in the summer just to retreat. And it was it's a rural community, but it was a place where because of the nature of segregation and the oppression of whiteness, that we would come together in community there. One of the things that happens in some of my classes, I open the class and I have students introduce themselves. And as part of the introduction, I ask, what is your race? What is your ethnicity? What is your citizenship? And I've had one young man, and more than one, couple, who came to the class and said, my race is Black. I am a Nigerian citizen. My ethnicity is Igbo, but I became Black when I came to the US. Same thing happened with a young man from Haiti. So I became Black when I came to the US. It is the construction of a society where there is this dialectical relationship. In my community, there were Black people and there were white people. They weren't just people. You understood very early in your life the difference and the distinction, and therefore you grew up in a Black community, and that Blackness had a definition. We've talked about the cultural essence of what I would say is the African-American community. But within that Black community, we have other ethnic groups, and intra-community, there are tensions. But that tension becomes unified in opposition to this framework, this paradigm within which we operate, which is dialectically Black and white. And that's because of the experience in this particular settler colony in which we live. And in the 21st century, as we're attempting to now manifest greater unity here in Boston, which is where we're situated, and where it becomes manifest, whether it's around economics or the political empowerment. Economically, what is our greatest export as a people? It's Sam and Dave. It's our culture. It's our music. That is our greatest export as a people. And that creates the projection of the 21st century image of who we are. It is commercial, it is economic, it is cultural. And there is then a tension with that, because is it going to be gangster rap or is it going to be common? You know, is it going to be Sam and Dave or is it going to be some other folks shuffling? The minstrel image, 21st century version. We have this tension. And as we're moving from that personal to the global in the projection of the image of who we are, what we are about, it is through those tensions that we're attempting to work out and control, because it's the politics of the economy that determine what gets projected. What reruns are being sold to the African commercial stations, which is what they play on TV on the continent or in the Caribbean. Because of the cost of production of images for television, they buy the reruns. What reruns are being bought? What image gets projected of who we are, what we are about? And with the movement now of immigration, we have now this transition of new waves of immigrants who are becoming part of this Black community, our Black manhood of the 21st century, who don't have now a sense of Sam and Dave because they just arrived, but they are part of our Black community and the representation of what that is. And so we have this tension internally that we're grappling with as well. And so I think that it's important as we have the conversation about our manhood, what it is, what it has meant to us, but we grew up in a certain era, what it is becoming. And so the voices of Yvette and younger people, I think, is important to hear that. And the impact, as Ron was saying, in a sense, you know, that the family that I have had, that Ron had, with my father present, with Joyce's father present daily, I can't be presumptuous that is the family that all Black men are experiencing, young men. And what's then the nature of how they are engaging with us and the reflection of the image of manhood that is being presented. I feel very blessed to have had the opportunity. In fact, right after my father transitioned, because I had the opportunity to travel and study and work in Africa. And I saw another representation of manhood. Joyce was very eloquent. I'm so glad you opened this conversation, Joyce, the way you did. And what I was able to see there in the representation of this, the lineage and the transition of kingship and what it meant, but also the humility to be able to say, there was a process in which we engaged that produced who you are. And we apologize for the role that we play. A sense of humility, yet pride and strength. That's the kind of manhood that I have seen. And I hope that we're able to continue to challenge the young men in our communities as we are reflecting on the choices that we're making, the projection of our images of ourselves. Let me stop here.
I knew you were going to do it, man. Wonderful. This is so powerful. I can go in so many different directions because I'm trying to react to some of the things that I'm hearing. I'll go in a couple of directions. One is that the imagery of the Black male, Black manhood and the Black male being present is such an important one for a larger and broader audience, you know, to really hear, because that's not the image that you get, either societally or globally. I had a wonderful experience in my own life, which taught me a couple of things. I had both experiences. I had the experience of the abandoning father, but I also had the experience of a father who was present. The abandoning father was one that I carried around for a long time. He left when I was 3 years old. He returned after my mother died. But I grew up with a stepfather. And the stepfather was the one that was present. I also learned, however, that the one that was not present was also present. The strongest image I have actually of the stepfather, and I talked to this with Joyce when we were talking about this session. So, you know, the strongest image I have of my stepfather is this hardworking man. He would come home from work every day, very gentle soul. He would come home from work every day, and he would open the door, and he'd look inside, and he'll look outside, and he'll look inside, and he'll look. He did this about 3 or 4 times, and then he would shake his head and go, "What a world, what a world." I didn't understand that at the time, but I knew that contrast that he was experiencing later on, you know, the contrast between what home meant for him and what the broader society meant. what a world, what a world. And that stayed with me throughout. With my biological father, wonderful gift that he actually gave me was the opportunity to experience forgiveness. Forgiveness. And learning that forgiveness really is not about anybody else. It really wasn't about him. It was what I had constructed inside of me about who he was. But after having an intensely personal growth type of experience where I went to this retreat and you had to do something concretely as a result of going through the retreat. And so my act was to call him up and you had to tell the truth. And I said to him on the phone, I said, you know, all these years, I've looked at you as an abandoning father. But the real truth is that I really love you. And he started crying on the other end of the phone. And he said to me, son, I've been waiting all my life to hear you say that. Then we went on, and my brother and I, who grew up not in his presence, but we went down and just had just this very long, intense, authentic conversation with him about what his life was like. And here was a man who grew up with not many options for him. I knew he was away a lot, but little did I know that he was a chauffeur for a white family that lived in another state. That's why he was away. But the little 3-year-old didn't know that. So the little 3-year-old created him as an abandoning father. He was out there trying to help the family. But that's not how the 3-year-old experienced him. So that was a wonderful gift that he actually gave me. And then coming back into my life after my mother passed and getting into, now he tried hard and I pushed him away and I'm pushing him away. My brother actually fully embraced him until we got to a point where that conversation took place when it was authentic. And then from there, actually went on to create some wonderful experiences and which led to having these big old huge family reunions. He was kind of like a patriarch of the family then. And little did I know how respected he was in the wider community. So that was a part of my experience in terms of the Black manhood that I got exposed to, and the journey then of going through that journey together. I wanted to. I know we're kind of like past the 12:30 mark here, but I wanted to. Well, let me ask Jim before I go on. How much more time can we get? Jim, are you there?
How much more time can you get? You ask a question like this at a time like this.
Time is up.
Well, this is such a rich
It was all family, so.
topic. I'd like to take more time. And Ronald, I'd like to hear more from you. I'd like to hear you on Jenna Dari's dialectical contradiction. We didn't hear enough from you. So let's take another, 5-10 minutes or so. But let's round this out, and I want to hear back from you also, Joyce.
Thank you, Jim. And then I want to end by sharing another song, with everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Ron, you want to comment a little bit on the dialectic? I did have a whole nother little presentation I was going to do around the transitions in consciousness and the different stages that we go through I was going to do a little share about, but we don't have time to do all that. I was also going to do a share of aspects of what the Black experience might be like, which is a multidimensional experience. We have to live in lots of different states of consciousness. And I was going to go and do a little deep dive in that, but that's for another time, I think. But that it's parallel, however, to that dialectic that Jim Adair was talking about. Getting in touch with the Black referent, learning what that means for each of us uniquely, and then also how do we then operationalize that in the world? But Ron, you want to say a word or two about that dialectic?
Thank you, Cuff. I think, Cuff, you need a podcast. which is really the lesson from this session, something that affords not just ample time in the moment, but an ample time to revisit the themes that you weren't able to get to. I think what I would say about the dialectic, is the following: is that our challenge is to not only, pull from the strengths as we define them from within ourselves, but to use those platforms of love to create understanding between and among those whose experiences may be different. And if we can start from a place of understanding, which means a place where we're willing to listen to each other's stories, to find where there is common ground, then we can avoid the presumptuous conclusions that have us dismiss each other far too often. Because we haven't taken the time to understand, to learn, or even, if I can just for a moment, if you look at Good Times and juxtapose that against the Cosby Show, and let's put aside economic circumstances for a moment, because while there is certain realities that flow from the different economic circumstances of the Evanses family, versus the Huxtables, there are also different outlooks. There are different experiences, that create chasms of separation that don't allow us to see that ultimately both families are trying to get to the same place for themselves and for those that'll be their progeny. And so I think I would leave it there on the dialectical differences, because I think you could have a whole conversation just on those elements. And if we're being honest, if we pull the contradictions that are even within our own examples of strong Black manhood. And just real quickly, I will say this, my father was a very loving man, not in the demonstrative ways of I love you or played ball with me, but was demonstrative in the ways that he was giving, and he was supportive. And even within there are contradictions that I struggle with to try to make sure that for how I view those things of his not saying I love you or not going and throw the ball around, those things that I interpreted as negatives of his personality, negatives I understood, but still treated as negatives, how I've tried to show up differently for my own children in ways I've been successful and ways I've failed. And so, we don't have to look beyond our families to pull out those contradictions if we're being honest with ourselves, because that is what makes us incredibly interesting as humans. the contradictions that are within us that we strive to overcome while we play up our strengths. I'll stop there.
Wonderful, man. The contradictions. Actually, that's a good lead, to what how I wanted to kind of end our conversation together. And I apologize that we don't have all of the time in the world to do a deep dive into all of these subject matters. Because indeed, you're quite right, Ron. I probably do need a podcast.
So there's my plug for you creating ones.
Okay, I was talking to somebody about the possibility of doing that. Maybe I'll do it through the Association for Humanistic Psychology. We can play around with that idea. But let me segue then to trying to end our experience through a song piece. But this is a song that actually mirrors kind of like the contradictions, but also the aspects that we haven't actually been able to talk about, which is the different parts of ourselves. That is the feminine and the male, the man and the woman part of all of us. And it's a song saying about I'm not going. It's from that movie Dreamgirls. But I want people to listen to it because theoretically it's about a woman spilling her spirit and soul out to a man. But really, if you listen to it with a different kind of ear, which is parts of the self talking to another part of the self, the male, the woman, the feminine part talking to the male part of the self, you hear the song in a very, very different way. So I want to ask people to listen carefully to that, and then we'll sort of bring closure to our experience. So, Rich, could you tee that up for us?
And I am telling you,
you don't get the image.
I'm not going.
We'll try it again.
Okay.
Yeah, everything's connected. Let's try it again. The Zoom zombies got us again.
Yeah.
Okay.
There we go.
And I am telling you, I'm not going. You're the best man I'll ever know. There's no way I can ever go. No, no, there's no way. No, 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 no way. I'm living without you. I'm not living without you.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, very powerful.
Cuff, that was a brilliant way to end the session. Thank you so much. And the only thing I would add to Ron's suggestion about a podcast is we ought to think about, maybe a monthly program on Humanity Rising that you and maybe Jemadari and Ron, Joyce, and others could host, where we could, over time, go into the depth and the complexities of this dialectical contradiction that Jemadari has named, and hear more stories and gain deeper insight. So we'll talk offline on that, but this has been so powerful, and I just want to thank each of you for the power of your story. Joyce, you kicked us off beautifully, just with the power of your narrative. And each one of the stories is added to the texture, and to be bookended with these songs is just been brilliant. So thank you so much. This has really, really added to the, and I would just say one comment in closing, to your notion of the dialectical contradiction, Jemadari, it exists in all cultures and in all families. We all have light and shadow content, but the dialectical contradiction for the Black male experience has been crushed through the crucible of 4 centuries of white supremacy and racism. And the fact that you have survived with such elegance and such grace is a testament to the nobility of the race, but it's a deeper testament to the nobility of what it takes us human beings to survive the onslaught of oppression. So I just want to acknowledge that as we close this session today in the masculine dialogues, that the Black male experience, people of color universally, but I think there's been a particular focus on the destruction of the Black male by the American white supremacists that has been excruciatingly focused, and it came, into global recognition through George Floyd. But as we all know, it's been the fate of hundreds, thousands of Black men over the last several centuries. So I just want to acknowledge that aspect of the dialectical contradiction, and thank you all for the eloquence with which you've spoken to the humanity that you've carved out in the face of those kinds of circumstances. So
thank you so much, Jim, for providing us with the platform, and we'll talk offline about some future conversations that could be had.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, everyone. And now we'll bring this session to a close, and everybody's welcome to the after chat. You'll see the link in the chat box. But George, do you want to just say a word about the session coming up in a couple hours when we turn to man in the world?
Yeah, Jim, actually, we've been in an extraordinary conversation about man in the world for the last couple of hours. I want to acknowledge and celebrate, Arthur Rubinstein, the conductor and pianist, used to say that a lot of people can play the notes, but the real music happens between the notes. And there's been a lot of that music happening between the notes. Music about depth and honor and intimacy and decency and authenticity and humanness. An extraordinary program. And I'm privileged to have participated in helping to create the structure for these masculine dialogues, and I've been really privileged to listen to each and every one of you, and I thank you. So coming up at noon, we will be talking about other aspects of man in relationship to the world with another really remarkable panel, and we invite everyone out there to join us. And I also invite every one of you to re-watch this program. It's going to be on YouTube for the next 24 hours, and then it'll be in our general replay of the entire series. But pay attention and listen. This is a gift. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll say bye for now and see you all in a few hours for the 8th of our 10 sessions on the masculine dialogues. Cuff, Ron, Jemadari, Joyce, thank you very deeply. Bye, everyone.
Alrighty.
Bye.
See you tomorrow.
All right.